Hey everybody, welcome back to another Jackson Jet Setting cruise review video. Today I'm reviewing my full experience on board the Norwegian Joy. This was my first time on board an NCL ship in about a decade, so I was excited to see all the changes, especially given how many cruises I've gone on in the last couple of years for this channel. So thanks a lot for finding this video. If you like this type of content, if you love cruise content, give this video a like and consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps us out. So this was a 2-night voyage on board the Norwegian Joy, so this is not a typical cruise. These 2-night sailings pop up from time to time, and they're very interesting to me because I'd like to try out a new ship and see exactly what the experience is like just on a shorter voyage, but also just get an impression of how a brand is actually functioning compared to all the other brands that I have traveled on for this channel. So one thing I won't be reviewing is whether a 2-night voyage is worth it or not. I actually have a full video up on the channel discussing just that, so I'll link to that down below. So embarkation day, I had a 9:30 to 10 a.m. arrival time at the port. I got this 21 days in advance in the NCL app. That was super easy for me to secure. I felt like it was a very early time to arrive at the port, but I was curious to see if maybe I would get on board like right at 11, or maybe it would be a little busy because this is one of the bigger ships. So I was excited nonetheless to head to the port. I was also excited to visit the new NCL terminal that I'd seen sailing out of Miami in the past, but unfortunately the MSC ship was actually docked there and using that terminal, so we were next door. So that was the first disappointment of the day. Overall security and getting my room key card were all super fast, and then I found the waiting area and I figured I'd be here for a little bit of time, but as the minutes and hours rolled on, it turns out we did not get on board until about 11:30 in the morning, which is an hour and a half after I arrived here at the terminal, which is not all that great. What's made worse is that it just wasn't really clearly communicated when we would actually be allowed to step through and begin that process to get on board. Once we were in that waiting area, people kind of stood up and we waited there for 30 minutes or so just standing. And so I think that this could have been handled a lot better. And so it's not a great experience, but overall, once I get on board, I usually forget about this. Now, we only had one port on this itinerary. This is NCL's private island, Great Stirrup Cay, and it is still a tender port. They are building piers in 2025, so that will be changing very shortly, which is great. But I did want to see how the process went in getting that tender ticket. Unfortunately, all of the screens that you could do that on weren't working. I could never get it to work. But luckily, I had a zipline tour on shore at 9 a.m. that day, and they told me that this is actually my tender ticket itself. So that would be my tip. If you're heading into Great Stirrup Cay, is grab an early zipline tour if you're thinking about doing that, because you can get off the ship as early as possible without a wait. I was also curious to see if they're going to be selling beverage packages on board, and I was pleasantly surprised to see that they were. For $30 a day plus gratuity, this was an absolute steal on this voyage, especially considering that the drink package did work onshore at Great Stirrup Cay. Muster station drill was one of the easiest things I've done at sea, so that was all nice and smooth. Unfortunately, I had to wait until 3 p.m. for my stateroom to be ready. Other ships are 1:30 or 2 o'clock. 3 p.m. seems a little late for me, but no problem. It was a brand new ship, so I went exploring and wanted to grab some lunch as well. I skipped the Garden Cafe because the buffet is always slammed on embarkation day, and it's not a very enjoyable experience for me. So I headed down to Taste, which is one of the 3 main dining rooms, and tried out the menu there. Overall, the menu was mostly sandwiches. I wasn't really all that impressed with the food there, but certainly edible. At that point, I decided I did want to probably just dine in specialty restaurants on this voyage, so I booked Teppanyaki and then Cagney's on night 2. So for impressions of the ship, I felt like the ship was pretty cool. It packed a lot of things on board. Up top, I felt like a lot of pools and experiences were really behind a paywall, unfortunately. You have the whole Haven area, which takes up several decks and has their own private pool up on the forward part of the ship. And then above all that is the Vibe Beach Club, which is also an extra charge. It was over $150 for my 2-night voyage. It does have its own hot tubs and its own bar. No drinks are included in that price, but it is a private sun lounging area spread out over 2 decks. So that whole area is kind of walled off to people not willing to pay that extra price. And then in the rear of the ship is the go-kart track, which are really fun to watch, but it does cost $15 per person. and it does get quite booked up very quickly. So overall, I felt like Norwegian does kind of keep up with their reputation of nickel and diming here. I think people that maybe don't do their research before getting on board may be surprised by all of the extra charges here. So just keep that in mind if you're heading on board the Norwegian Joy. One really impressive aspect of the Norwegian Joy that I loved was the waterfront, which is on deck 8. So this stretches over most of the deck on the outside. It's a full promenade that you can walk around the front of the ship, as well as dine al fresco at the specialty dining restaurants. There's also a cigar lounge that you can only access from the waterfront. But overall, I loved this area. It's a great place to walk. And I loved that the restaurants had seating outdoors. I think you're going on a cruise vacation a lot of times for the Caribbean atmosphere, and it's just great to be able to experience that even at dinner. A lot of ships I've been on, and I'm looking at the Oasis class ships here on Royal Caribbean, there just are not a lot of windows looking out into the world. And I felt like the Norwegian Joy did an amazing job of bringing in a lot of natural light into their spaces, especially on the waterfront areas as well. And the Food Republic and District Brew House restaurants that were not outdoor, but did extend over the edge of the ship and had sort of a curved glass enclosure over a lot of the seating. So you still got those ocean views while you're enjoying a beverage or a meal. Speaking of specialty dining, that was one big miss that I've had on the Norwegian Joy. Now, I only got to experience 2 of the restaurants, but teppanyaki was one of them, and it was $60 a person plus gratuity. That was very expensive in my eyes, especially considering that there wasn't as much food or variety as other teppanyaki experiences that I've seen at sea and experienced. But overall, if you're into the hibachi style experience, this is definitely a fun group activity. So something definitely to look forward to on your cruise. And then I tried out Cagney's, which is the ship's steakhouse. And this is typically always going to be the best, especially dining meal on board. It's a delicious steak, maybe a little bit of seafood, and just a lot of food and really delicious. Also $60 a person, which is pretty par for the course for steakhouses at sea. But I felt like the food quality was just not very good. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to knock down the Norwegian Joy for this one. Another negative for me was the included food on the island, Great Stirrup Key. There's a beach barbecue, and I'm always excited by this on the private islands that the cruise lines put on because they're able to use real fire and get some delicious food all burned up for you. But unfortunately, the buffet experience here was just not very good. It was mostly burgers and hot dogs. They had some jerk chicken, which didn't taste all that good. I don't think was presented very well. And then they had some pizzas that didn't look all that good either. Kind of made me feel like this was just really produced for mass quantities, which it is a cruise ship. But overall, I just didn't feel like the food quality was all that good. The bars were pretty interesting on land, though, but they did get quite busy later in the day. The lines were incredibly long, I think inexcusably long. So just keep that in mind if you're looking forward to having a couple drinks on shore, that the lines can get quite long later in the day. The lines to get back on the ship can get quite long as well. I left before the island closed down to get everyone back on board, but I have seen how long those lines can really get to get on board those tenders. One area that I really liked for food was the local on board. This is the 24-hour restaurant. It's located next to the casino, and they have Reubens and chicken wings and pretzel bites, as well as drinks. And overall, I felt like the service here was really good and quick for what it was. Now, for the private island, I touched on some of the misses. I did like the zipline experience that I had. It was a little short and a little expensive for what it was. I paid about $140 for my experience. Lasted just under an hour, but it is a great viewpoint of the entire island. The island itself is very beautiful. It's a great beach day on land, plenty of beach chairs, but I will say I wish that there was more things to do on this island. I feel like there are plans in place to maybe expand the island a little bit because there's a lot of undeveloped land. And right next door is Coco Key, which has a lot going on it. And you can see that from shore. The most negative thing for me are the tender boats that have to take you to and from the ship. So I know that they're building a pier and that will be fixed. So it's good that NCL is addressing that issue. Finally, I want to touch on my stateroom. I had an ocean view stateroom and it was perfectly fine. It was located on deck 5, good location on the deck, Plenty of room for me as a solo traveler, so no complaints there. Felt like the bathroom was nice and large and well designed. It was nice that there was a shower and tub for families. This was a family ocean view stateroom. I booked a guaranteed cabin, so this is just the cabin that was assigned to me. So I was pretty happy with it. The only thing I will say is that I was on a lower deck and I found myself wanting to be on some of the higher decks most of the time, so it was a long commute to and from my stateroom. The other problem I felt was that sometimes when I was on one part of the ship, I couldn't make it back to my cabin without having to go to a different deck. So overall, I felt like, I would choose that deck again. I would just kind of realize whether or not I wanted to be close to the inside decks or up on the pool decks. So that should do it for my review. Overall, I had a lovely time on board NCL, and there were a lot of things going for the Norwegian Joy. I would just say that NCL does have a few policies that I wish that they would change. Fighting for every single dollar from your passenger can sometimes just feel a little monotonous when you are on board. But overall, I feel like the experience is pretty decent for what you're paying for. On these longer voyages, you have the More at Sea offers, which includes a lot of the things that I was paying for on this shorter voyage. So a lot of that is addressed earlier on different voyages. But the Norwegian Joy was a nice ship. I think it felt nice and new. It was well maintained, and the crew were really nice. So overall, I would not hesitate to step on board.